Hi, everybody. Welcome and thanks for coming. I hope you guys can hear me okay. I'm just going to go ahead and start, and as more people join, well, we'll just continue from there. Today I wanted to give a really global overview of the TOEIC. I really wanted to start with talking about what the TOEIC is, what it's used for, how it is in France, and then talk about the first part of the TOEIC, the first listening part. I'm just going to check to see if anybody else has any questions on the Facebook group. Okay, so let's get started. So I'm going to share my screen and I'm going to share a presentation, like I said, of just a general overview of the TOEIC. If you have any questions, there are two possibilities. I'll just share my screen to show you what I'm talking about. Okay. So yeah, sorry, there's a strange effect there, but you can see at the top of the at the top left of the screen, you have a little bar. If you access that bar, you'll see there's a Q&A section, and there's also a question or a chat section, so you can ask me questions in the chat or in the Q&A. There's a little delay between when you type your question and when I see the question, so it might take me 20 seconds to reply to a question. So that's the chat function. Okay. Okay. So I'm going to show you a presentation now about the TOEIC. So I'm going to share my screen again. Okay. So let's get started. Okay. So this is just one workshop of several workshops that I want to do on the TOEIC. Okay, that should be okay. Like I said in the Facebook group, this presentation will be posted on the Facebook group after I'm done. So if you missed something, you don't have to take notes. You can download the presentation, the PowerPoint presentation after I'm done. So this is the first of maybe 3 or 4 parts workshop on the TOEIC to try to give you the best strategies for each part, just really global overview of the strategies. You can check out the other events on the Facebook group. The link is there, facebook.com/EnglishActivate. So the first thing I want to talk about globally, what is the TOEIC? So the TOEIC is a business exam that was created by a company called ETS, which is an American testing company. It's a business version of the TOEFL exam. Many people know the TOEFL exam. It's a academic exam that's used in a lot of universities. It has the same parts as the TOEIC does, which is the listening and reading grammar parts. But the TOEFL also has a speaking and writing part. That's not to say that you should do the TOEFL. If you're in a business context, the TOEIC is really the exam that you want to do. It's recognized internationally. I put in quotations because it's when you look at the countries that actually recognize the TOEIC, it's really popular in France, Greece, Italy, the United States. You don't really find a lot of TOEIC recognition outside of those countries. If you're looking for a job in France, for example, that's great. Every employer in France knows about the TOEIC and will recognize the TOEIC if you have that on your CV. They know the scores, they know what it means. They'll give you, I have students who phone for jobs and who are told, yeah, if you want this job, you've got to have a minimum TOEIC score of 800, 750, something like that. So training managers in France, they really know the TOEIC. So in France, you're safe. In other countries, it's been devalued. In Japan, for example, there was a scandal about the company that produced the TOEIC. So in Japan, it's not really popular. In the UK, it was used for an immigration exam, but then it was taken out of that. So it's been a little discredited in the UK. And in South Korea, it's also been discredited, but it's not really important. It's just to say that the TOEIC is not exactly an international exam, but at least in France, it's recognized, and in French companies, it's recognized. So the structure of the TOEIC is pretty simple, and every TOEIC test is structured in the same way. Let's just make sure that that's okay. Just give me 1 second. Yeah. Okay, so every TOEIC test is structured in the same way. Essentially, you've got 200 questions. They're all multiple choice questions. You've got the choice of A, B, C, or D, except one part where it's just A, B, C, but there's always four answers possibly, and you choose one answer. You have two halves of the TOEIC. The first half is a listening part. So that's 45 minutes. You'll hear a continuous audio, a CD. There's no repeats. It doesn't stop, and there's no repeats. And there's 100 questions for that part. You can have a maximum of 495 points. So you see that there's actually, it's approximately 5 points per question, but there's a little margin of error that you can have with that. You can make some mistakes and still have maximum points, 2 or 3 mistakes, and still have maximum points. The second half is the reading part. In the reading part, you've got 1 hour and 15 minutes. It's 100 questions again, and again, it's 495 points. There's a little margin of error in that. So those are the two parts of the TOEIC. So within that, when we finish the test, how is it corrected? So the questions are all multiple choice. The picture that I've put there is an example of what the actual answer paper will look like, except the E, ignore that. But that's what we're going to be doing, is filling in circles to answer each question. There's always one correct answer. There's never any ambiguity. There's no doubt. One answer is correct, and that's it. There are no negative points. So I'll mention later on, you can put an answer randomly. If you don't know what it is, just pick an answer randomly, and that will, you have a 25% chance essentially of picking the right answer because it's multiple choice. We're filling in the circles. That's really important because in the next point I mentioned, the answers are sent to ETS for correction, and the correction is done by a computer. So if you don't fill in that circle correctly, it's possible that the computer could miss something. Also, if you're filling in A, for example, and you make a mistake, so you want to fill in C, you have to erase the answer for A really clearly so that the computer doesn't, because if the computer sees two answers, it'll just say false. Yeah, so you have to have one clear answer on your answer sheet. The scores are sent to you after, I think, 14 days by post, and you only can see 2 total scores, one for listening and one for reading. But there's no information about why you got that score. There's no breakdown by parts. It doesn't show you where you went wrong. There's no corrections. There's no feedback. You don't get to keep a copy of the test. Once you give the test back on the day of the exam, that's it. You never see it again. So you have to already, I see that as a blessing and a curse, as an advantage and a disadvantage, because having feedback is great in a way to show you where you made a mistake, to show you what you need to do to improve. But at the same time, when you're in the test, the pressure of, oh my God, I'm going to make a mistake, is taken away when you think, actually, even if I make a mistake, I won't know. So I'm not going to be embarrassed. Nobody's going to tell me I made a mistake. So almost that takes away a little pressure, which is nice. So see it as an advantage more than a disadvantage that you don't have feedback in the TOEIC, okay? There are rules when you enter the room. You'll have a room for the TOEIC. There'll be one examiner. There'll be several students. In our center, we do it with about 9 students at a time. You're only permitted a pencil, a rubber, and a bottle of water. So the pencil, so you can fill in the spaces, a rubber so you can erase if you make a mistake. There's no writing on the question paper, and no what the French call brouillon, so rough paper, we say in English. That's really important because a lot of people who I teach are really familiar with the technique of making really quick notes. When they're listening, they'll write down some really quick notes on their paper, and it helps them to remember. But in the TOEIC test, you won't be permitted to do that. If you do that, the examiner will tell you to stop, not to stop the test, but to stop writing, and you may only write on the answer paper. You can't make notes. And what we'll see as we look at the different parts of the TOEIC is you don't really have time to make notes. there's no thinking time with the TOEIC. If you're thinking, you're wasting time. You have to really just be concentrated on always being prepared for the next listening question. I'm speaking about the listening part. You have to always be prepared. I'll explain later when I break down the different parts of the TOEIC, but you don't have time to write things. You don't have time to make notes. So like I said, the timing is very strict. You can't talk to anybody. There's no breaks because you're in a big group. There's no breaks, and you can't ask any questions unless it's that you can't hear the CD or your pencil is broken or something like that. But you can't ask questions about the vocabulary, about what's written in the test. You're alone when you're completing the test. So what are the advantages of taking the TOEIC? Like I said, it's internationally recognized in certain countries. It's easy and it's low cost. That's more an advantage for the training managers. So they can easily give their employees a TOEIC to test their level. A training manager can easily do a recruitment drive by looking at TOEIC scores, and it's only 80 euros per TOEIC. So it's low cost in comparison to other tests. It's also less stress in comparison to other tests. So for example, there's the BULATS exam. It's becoming popular. There's also IELTS, IELTS. If you want, you can Google them and you'll find out information about that. There's obviously Cambridge exams as well. Those ones all have more complicated questions, more comprehension. The IELTS has a speaking part where you're face-to-face with an examiner for, I think it's 14 minutes. So that's quite stressful. I think the TOEIC in terms of stress is pretty low. So that's why compared to other exams, it's low. It corresponds to CEFR levels. If you want to Google that, CEFR, in French, it's CECR. It's the Common European Frame of Reference for Languages. So that means that if you get a TOEIC score of 785, for example, you can say I'm level B2. If you get 900, more than 900, you can say I am C1. And employers sometimes understand that. It means I'm autonomous or I'm advanced, something like that. So it's good that that corresponds to a European level, that you can say, I have this score, so I have this level in English. It looks good on your CV if you want to get a job. And it can also help with application for, if you want a promotion. Sometimes they'll want to know that you have a good English level. If the promotion is for a job that's more international, the employer might ask you to prove your English level before you get the promotion. I've seen that sometimes. And of course, for getting a new job, many companies today are international. Their headquarters is somewhere, in London or New York. And so they'll want you to prove your English level, even just at the point of sending your CV so that you pass to the next stage of getting that phone call. It can be useful for that too. So that's one advantage of the TOEIC. So let's really get into now, what is the TOEIC, what's in there. The more we understand about how it's structured, the more we'll be prepared. Like I said, it's always the same structure. So if you're prepared for the structure, you'll have an easier time in the exam. So there's 4 parts in the listening. Part 1 is picture descriptions. So there's 10 questions. You'll see a picture for each question, and you'll listen to 4 descriptions for that picture. Your job is to choose the description that matches the picture. We're going to look at part 1 today. I'm going to give you some strategies today for part 1. So we're already going to cover that. And then the other parts, I want to go into more detail. So that'll be for the next webinar. But today we'll talk about part 1. Part 2 is question answer recognition. That means there are 30 questions. You will listen to 1 question spoken and then listen to 3 answers. 1 answer corresponds to the question. So your job is to choose A, B, or C, the answer that corresponds to the question. The part 3 is dialogue comprehension. That means there's 2 people speaking. There are 30 questions again. That equals 10 dialogues because you have 3 questions per dialogue. So 3 questions equals 1 dialogue, and there are 4 possible answers for each question. So each dialogue contains 12 answers. So there's more comprehension in that part 3. Part 4 is the same, only that there's monologue as opposed to dialogue. So that means 1 person is speaking. That's a radio announcement. That's a presentation. That's a telephone message, something like that. There's 1 person speaking, And it's the same, 3 questions per monologue, 12 answers within that monologue. So 4 answers per question, as usual. The reading part has 3 parts. Part 5 is a grammar and vocabulary part. So essentially you've got sentences with 1 word or more, maybe 2 words missing, and you have to recognize from 4 possibilities, A, B, C, D, what is the correct word for that space. So you've got 40 questions, a lot of sentences to put in the missing words to recognize the correct word. Again, we'll look at that in a future webinar. That's one of the most important ones, one of the ones that we can really prepare for, by learning grammar rules. So that's something we'll spend a lot of time on in a future webinar. Part 6 is a text gap fill. So very similar to part 5, but this time we have a full text where there's 3 spaces in the text, at different places in the text, and you have 4 answers that can go in that space. You have to choose 1 answer for each space. And part 7, text comprehension, you're going to look at approximately 12 texts. It changes, but approximately 12, with about 2 up to 5 questions per text. And it's really questions about, what does it mean, this paragraph, when they say this, and what do you think they want the customer to do? And it's really comprehension questions about text. So that part is really important because it's long, really long. The texts are long. It takes a long time to do. So that's for time management, the most important part. Again, we'll see that in a future webinar. The overall strategies that we need to think about when we're doing a TOEIC, not specific to one part for the whole test. Instinct, using your instincts. Thinking costs time. When you're thinking in between questions, especially in the reading part, you're wasting time. And also thinking too much can often make you make mistakes, especially French, because there are so many similarities between French and English that when you think, okay, that's the answer, A is the answer, and then you think about it too much and you say, oh, but maybe C, because in French we say C. That's when you'll just get confused, and very often you'll make mistakes just by thinking too much, by not being sure about the question. Timing is really important. So to take a watch with you into the exam, you're permitted to have a watch on you. So just to keep yourself aware of the time, maybe when you're doing practice tests, see how long it takes you to read a text. Can you reduce that time? Just be conscious of your timing. Control as well is an important thing. In fact, to have less control, it's sort of linked to instinct. You let your subconscious take over. You try to let your brain do the work, not your conscious thinking process. Don't let yourself be confused. Just, feel what the answer is and just go with that. Go with your instincts. Don't try to control too much your understanding, especially in the listening part. In the listening part, you can't control consciously your listening for 45 minutes. You will be completely tired by the end of it. So try just to be as easy and as free as possible in the listening part, and don't try to control too much. Try to relax. Being too tense in the exam, as many people are, will often make you take more time because you're more concerned about making mistakes. So try to relax. It's easier said than done, but try. Exposure for me is really important. If you're going to take a TOEIC exam, it's only reading and listening. Practicing speaking is really important, but to take the TOEIC, you've got to read as many articles online as possible. Every day on the train, on the way to work, read an article, listen to something on, TED.com, TED.com. I'll put that in a link afterwards, or BBC News or something like that. Just listen to and read as many English things as you can, and it will really help that instinct to get more exposure, and that instinct will be better in the exam. The more you read, the more you listen. And of course, practice. You have to practice. You have to do as many practice tests as possible. There's a link I'm going to give you at the end, near the end, which is to do practice questions online. They have a lot of practice questions and it's free. So just do them over and over and over again. The more you get that habit of doing TOEIC questions, the easier it will be every time. Okay, so let's now go on to the main part. Let's look at the strategies to complete part 1. So part 1 we said was the picture description part. So this is what you're going to get in the exam. You're going to have a picture. It's going to be a scene, somebody doing something, and you're going to hear 4 descriptions of that scene, right? So I want to do this as an activity. So I'm going to tell you the 4 descriptions. I'm going to do it at the TOEIC speed, and I want you watching to think for yourself what the answer is, and maybe post the answer in the chat or in the questions. If you click at the side of the presentation, you'll see chat and you'll see Q&A. Put your answer in there, and we'll see how many people get the right answer. Okay, so what we're looking for just in this part is current actions. What are these people currently doing? And I'll explain afterwards, but I'll read you the 4 answers. Your job is to choose which one describes this picture, okay? So, answer A, the men are cooking with water. Answer B, the workers are building a flat. Answer C, the builders are looking at plans. Answer D, everyone is drawing on the paper. So I'll repeat them again just to help you a little bit. So if you've made your decision, put your answer in. I'll just repeat them again. In the real TOEIC, you won't have a repetition of the questions, but I'll tell you again just in case. So answer A, the men are cooking with water. Answer B, the workers are building a flat. Answer C, the builders are looking at plans. Answer D, everyone is drawing on the paper. Okay, so let's move on and I'll show you what the answers were for that part. So this is what I said. The answer A was the men are cooking with water. So what I did here was I asked, and this is what the TOEIC does, I put in a word that looks very similar, it sounds very similar to looking. So cooking sounds very similar to looking. Obviously they're not cooking. It's just a trap, it's a trick. It's something to catch you, to make you say, oh, maybe that's the answer. Also, they mention water, and you see water on the table, so that's just to try to confuse you. And that's always the case. There's water on the table. There's a hat. There are plans. So there are lots of things they can put in there to trick you. But that's not. The men are cooking with water. Obviously, that's wrong. The workers are building a flat. Okay, flat, apartment, building. It's possible. We're looking at the plans, and you're thinking, oh, maybe they're doing that. I see, it looks like an apartment, but we can't say that for sure. If you can't say for sure, it's not the right answer, right? That's another TOEIC trap. It's that they're giving you something, you say, oh, maybe, but maybe's bad, right? If you think maybe, it's not that. So just say no and listen for the other answers. Maybe keep your pencil on B, but don't mark it. Just keep it there and listen for C and D, just to be sure. C, the builders are looking at plans. Well, now we can say, okay, probably they're builders. There's a hat on the table, and they are with plans in their hand, therefore probably looking at it. So we can be 99% sure. It's not a maybe, it's, yeah, okay, I see. That makes sense. And D, everyone is drawing on the paper. So you say, yeah, there's one guy drawing on the paper. Yeah, but you have to get it exactly right. Not one guy is drawing on the paper. Everyone is drawing on the paper. No. So, there are 2 guys who are not drawing on the paper. This is just to show you, it seems really simple, but sometimes you can get caught by the simplest mistake of just saying, oh yeah, there's one guy drawing on the paper. No, that's not what it is. So we're looking for the answer where we say, okay, yeah, that's pretty sure that's the answer. It's 99% sure, or normally 100% sure that's the answer. Yeah, so that's what we're looking for. What are they doing? And also trying to avoid the tricks, the traps. So other kinds of traps that I wanted to talk about, just to give you some examples. Here are 4 possible descriptions for this picture, right? The man is carrying some socks. The worker is opening a box. The employee is packing a product. The sales rep is moving his things. So I put 4 categories of what this could be in terms of a trap, right? There's the trap of assumption. You assume something, but it's not what you actually see in the picture. There's obviously vocabulary traps. There's something that's related to the action, but not what he's currently doing. And also what we call a sinophone, so a word like looking and cooking that sounds like the word we're looking for, but isn't the word we're looking for. So just take a second and maybe you can post in the Q&A, which do you think is which? What is an assumption? What is vocabulary? What is a related action? What is sinophone? A, B, C, or D? I'll just give you a second for that. Okay, so here's what I planned for this part. The assumption is C. So when we say the employee is packing a product, that's possible. Maybe he is, but we can't see enough in the picture to be sure. We don't know. We can't see what he's doing with his hand. So if we're not 100% sure, maybe it's that. It's not the answer. Okay. The vocabulary trap is D. You know, the sales rep is moving his things. In English, when we say you're moving your things, to move your things, it's equivalent to moving house. Yeah, it's saying, oh, I need to move my things. I'm staying at somebody else's house. So it sounds like, oh, maybe he's moving something, but no, it's the expression he's moving his things. It's a specific expression. So that's not the case. The related action is B. So the worker is opening a box. He might do that. You know, he's got it in his hands. That could be the next thing he's going to do. It's something you normally do with a closed box, but that's not currently what he's doing. So that's clearly not the answer. And the sinophone is the man is carrying some socks. Socks is clearly not box. But when you speak in fluent English, and they will in the TOEIC, you hear the man is carrying some socks, and you think some socks, some box, some socks, some box. Maybe you're not sure. So that is a very common trap in the TOEIC to use that fluent English to make you think the word is the word you're looking for, but it sounds like it just in fluent English. It's kind of lost in the sentence. So those are 4 really typical kinds of traps that they use in the TOEIC. The other thing that's difficult in the TOEIC is the vocabulary, because when we look at a picture, when we open the page for part 1 and we're looking at the picture, it's very easy to say, okay, I know what this is. I see what these things are. I know them in my head in English. But there's not often just one word for something. You know, I've labeled 4 parts of this picture and just the picture in general, and I found at least 3 words for each part that I could use to describe. Yeah, for A, B, C, and D, I think, you know, there are several words you could use to describe that. So I'll just give you a second, just brainstorm in your head. Think about how would you describe these 5 things, the 4 objects in the picture and generally the picture. How would you describe that with words, with synonyms? How many synonyms can you think? Can you think of 3 or more maybe? So I'll give you a minute to do that. Okay, so I'm going to show you the words that I got for these different parts, just to give you an idea. So A, you could easily call this, yeah, a desk, that's clear, a table. It could also be a place. You know, it could be they're sitting in their places, for example. Just means that your correct place where you're supposed to be. B, clearly a teacher who's teaching, so that would be a verb we could mix with that. There's also a woman, you know, giving a lesson. You could also call her an instructor, and she's taking questions. So think about, that's already 3 things with 3 descriptions. You could mix them any way you want. A teacher taking questions, an instructor giving a lesson. You know, there are many ways you could mix that up. So if you have 1 word in your head, it's maybe not enough. C, we call that a blackboard. It could just be a board or the board. It could be a chalk board. Chalk is what you write on the board with. It could also just be a lesson. You know, it could be just describing what's on the board is the lesson for the day. So That's also a way you could describe C. D, we call that in school, we call that a pupil. The pupil is sitting. We could also call it a student who's attending a class. We could also call it, of course, a child or children if you're describing all of them and they're raising their hands. Again, you can mix them. A pupil raising his hand, a student sitting, a child attending a class. You know, there are many permutations. And generally what we're looking at is a class, a classroom, a group. It could even just be a session. It could be the teacher is teaching a session. The instructor is taking questions from the group. The pupils are sitting in the classroom. You know, you see how many permutations you could make just with this one picture. So although it seems simple, potentially there's a lot of vocabulary. Another point to mention is that I didn't put here, there are sometimes words that you've never heard before. You know, chalkboard is a good example. Maybe that, I don't know if everybody will have heard chalk before, but chalk is maybe a word that's not the same in your language. Certainly in French, it's not the same at all. It's very different. So they will often put a word in because they know that a lot of people don't know it. So they'll use a verb that's very unfamiliar, very rare, perhaps. You have to just filter that out. You have to just, okay, I think I understood 2 out of the 3 words. You know, I heard the teacher, blah, blah, the classroom. You know, the teacher, something, the classroom. Okay, it's probably correct. If you can eliminate the other questions, even if you don't know the word, you just hear blah, blah, blah. You know, you choose that answer. It's probably the right one. If you eliminate the other ones, then, you know, just assume that the TOEIC is using strange vocabulary to try to trap you, yeah? Okay, so just to summarize what we looked at there is a really global view of the key strategies for that part. So what are those key strategies? Look at the picture. Always look at the picture first. What are they doing in the picture? Yeah, think about present continuous. What are they doing? They are doing something. They are eating, they are talking, they are teaching, whatever. There are no partial descriptions. That is to say, you know, with the first picture, it's not about the water on the table. It's about what's happening. So there are 3 guys and they're looking at plans. It's not about one object in the picture. It's the whole picture, the complete picture. Be careful of similar sounding words. So that was what I said, the synophones, so looking and cooking, box and socks, you know, that you will always have those in a TOEIC, it's sure. So just keep yourself relaxed, keep yourself open to the possibilities that maybe you heard it wrong, maybe you misunderstood, maybe that's the right answer because the other 3 are ridiculous. So, you know, just choose it. You know, even if you think you might be wrong, just choose it. You know, it's better that you choose one where you're 50% sure than just doing it randomly. Ignore the strange vocabulary. If you hear a strange word like chalkboard, just ignore it. Just focus on the overall sense. Does it sound good? And listen to all the answers before you decide. Like I said, you know, you hear A and you think, yeah, A sounds good. Put your pencil on it. Don't fill it in. Just rest your pencil on it and wait for the other B, C, D. And you say, yeah, okay, I'm sure it's A. Then fill it in. Or B, C, D. Oh, D, I think actually D is better. Then there you go. You fill that in. You don't need to waste time erasing the A answer. So listen to everything before you decide. And if everything else fails, you do, as the French say, au pif. So just put anything. Just do A, B, C, D. Okay, I choose A. You know, or choose A for everything when you don't know. And then at least you take chance out of the equation. You just say, okay, if I don't know, I'm going to choose A. And just every answer, choose A if you don't know. Okay. So that's it. That's it for part 1. And next, maybe in 2 weeks, I'm going to do another webinar where we'll talk about, I hope, part 2 and part 3, maybe even part 4. We can really finish the listening part. I'll try to do that in a couple of weeks. So if anyone has any questions, there is the Q&A section. There's the chat section. I'm available on Facebook all the time, so just put a question in the group where you saw the link to the webinar. Send me a message at Activate English on the page. I've put up in the showcase, if you click on the showcase at the side, it's the 3 yellow labels at the side. Showcase, you'll see the link to the page. I'm also putting up a link to the listening test I talked about. So this is a website. It's called examenglish.com. And they've made a lot of free TOEIC questions. So you can do part 1 to part 7 examples that really reflect the TOEIC, and you can do that. You can do those questions online. It will give you the answer, the corrections. You can repeat as many times as you want, and it's totally free. So that's the link is at the side, but it's examenglish.com. I'll also put the link in the Facebook group afterwards if you don't see it. And finally, if you want to really practice your speaking and your listening, come to the page Activate English, look at some of the events. I've put an example there. We're going to go to Marks and Spencer's on Saturday, so in 3 days. So if you wanna come there, you can meet us there. It's only €20. You've got pedagogic materials. You'll discover food in Marks and Spencer's. You'll have a chance to speak English in real life. Put yourself under real pressure to speak English, and hopefully give yourself a real boost, and that'll help when you come to the TOEIC. If you have that boost in confidence, that'll really help. So consider that. I'll put all these links in the Facebook group. And other than that, if nobody has any questions, no, that's okay. So thanks a lot, and I'll post the link in the group Activate English for the next webinar for the next parts of the TOEIC, and I hope to see you then. So thanks. Bye.